The journey home, I woke up to the soft sound of rain tapping against the window, a familiar rhythm that lulled me in and out of sleep. For a few moments I lay there, still half dreaming, unsure of where I was. The air was cool, the scent of damp earth and wood filled my lungs, and I could hear the distant cry of birds waking up to a new day. It was peaceful, but as my eyes fluttered open and I took in my surroundings, confusion started to settle in. This wasn't home. The room was small, simple, with wooden walls that had clearly seen better days. There was a single bed, a wooden chair near the corner, and a table littered with scraps of paper and an old rusty lantern. I turned to the window, but all I could see was a thick, endless fog. Beyond it, the faint outline of trees loomed like shadows. I sat up, feeling a dull ache in my head. Where was I? How did I get here? I couldn't remember. My thoughts were hazy, like I had just woken from a long dream. But there was nothing solid I could grasp onto. No name. No memory of the night before. Just the sound of the rain and the unsettling emptiness in my mind. I reached for the glass of water on the table, gulping it down in hopes that it would clear my head. But it didn't help. The room was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the wooden floor under my feet as I paced. There was no one here, no sign of life, just the remnants of someone who might have stayed here before me. I ran a hand through my hair and sighed, sitting back down on the edge of the bed. The clothes I wore felt unfamiliar, a simple gray shirt and loose pants. They fit well enough, but they didn't feel like mine. Nothing about this place felt like mine. And then it hit me, that gnawing question at the back of my mind that I had been avoiding. Who was I? I couldn't remember. No name, no face in my mind to attach myself to. My own identity was lost, like a dream slipping away the moment you try to hold on to it. Panic started to bubble up in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. Panicking wouldn't help. I needed to think, to figure out where I was and how I had ended up here. I stood up and walked to the window, pressing my hand against the cool glass. Outside, the fog swirled lazily, obscuring everything beyond a few feet. I couldn't see a road or a path, no houses or signs of civilization. Just trees, their branches swaying gently in the morning breeze. It felt like I was completely alone, isolated from the rest of the world. But there had to be a way out. There always was. I tried the door. Locked. My heart sank, but I didn't give up. I examined the lock, hoping to find some way to pick it or force it open, but it was old and rusted shut. Whoever had put me in this room clearly didn't want me leaving anytime soon. I sighed, running my hand along the rough wood of the door. The silence of the room pressed in on me, making it hard to think. I needed answers. There had to be something in this room that could give me a clue about what was happening. Anything. I turned back to the table, where the scraps of paper were scattered. Most of them were blank, yellowed with age, but one sheet caught my eye. A single sentence, scrawled in messy handwriting. Remember who you are. I stared at the words, my chest tightening. It was like a message to me, a reminder of something I had forgotten. But it didn't make sense. I couldn't remember. No matter how hard I tried to dig through the fog in my mind, I came up empty. Who was I supposed to be? Frustration flared in me, and I crumpled the paper in my fist. But then I stopped, forcing myself to take a deep breath. Getting angry wouldn't solve anything. I had to be smart about this. There was a reason I was here, a reason someone had locked me in this room, and I wasn't going to figure it out by losing my temper. I sat down at the table, smoothing out the paper again. Maybe there was more here than I realized. I picked up the pen that had been lying next to the paper and turned it over in my hands. It was an old fountain pen, the kind you rarely see anymore. Its metal was cool to the touch, and as I held it, I felt a strange sense of familiarity, like I had used one of these before. But that wasn't possible, was it? I stared down at the blank sheet of paper in front of me, the pen in my hand. Slowly, almost without thinking, I started to write. My hand moved on its own, forming letters, then words. I didn't know what I was writing, but I couldn't stop. The words poured out of me like water from a dam, spilling onto the page faster than I could comprehend. The man in the black coat, the house in the forest, the binoculars in my hand. I stopped, my heart racing. What was I writing? It didn't make any sense, but at the same time, something about it felt right. Like I was remembering something important. I kept writing, the words flowing effortlessly. I was watching the house, waiting. Someone was inside. A car pulled up, a white Jaguar. The door opened and then I stopped again, my breath catching in my throat. What happened next? I couldn't remember. The memory was there, just out of reach, teasing me. I could almost see it, like a shadow on the edge of my vision. But every time I tried to focus, it slipped away. I set the pen down, leaning back in the chair. My hands were trembling. What had I been doing? Watching a house? Spying on someone? It didn't make sense, but the more I thought about it, the more certain I was that it was real. This was something that had happened. This was why I was here. But that still didn't explain who I was or why I had ended up in this room. And it didn't explain why someone had locked me in here. I stood up, pacing again. There had to be a way out of this. Maybe there was something I hadn't noticed yet. I started searching the room, checking every corner, every crack in the walls. But there was nothing. No hidden doors, no loose floorboards, just the four walls of the room trapping me inside. I went back to the window, staring out at the fog. The trees outside seemed to go on forever, an endless sea of green and gray. But I couldn't stay here. I had to find a way out, to figure out who I was and what had happened to me. And the only way to do that was to get out of this room. I picked up the chair, testing its weight. It was old but sturdy enough. With a deep breath, I raised it over my head and swung it at the window. The glass shattered with a deafening crash, the sound echoing through the room. Cold air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of rain and pine. I stepped closer to the broken window, peering out. There was a drop, but it wasn't too far. Maybe 10 or 12 feet. I could make it. I had to. Carefully, I climbed up onto the windowsill, bracing myself against the frame. The fog was thick, but I could see the ground below now, a patch of grass and dirt wet from the rain. I took a deep breath, then jumped. The fall was shorter than I expected, and I landed awkwardly, my legs buckling beneath me. Pain shot up my ankle, but I pushed myself up, ignoring it. There was no time to waste. I looked around, trying to get my bearings. The house was large, old, and surrounded by thick woods. There was no path leading away, no road in sight. But I wasn't going to let that stop me. I started walking, limping slightly as I made my way toward the trees. The further I went, the more the fog seemed to close in around me, swallowing up the world in a blanket of gray. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still wet, and the air was heavy with the scent of earth and leaves. Every step felt like I was walking deeper into a dream, a place where nothing was real and everything was uncertain. But I had to keep going. I had to find answers. The trees grew denser as I moved forward, their branches intertwining overhead like a canopy. The path beneath my feet was uneven, slick with mud, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. Not until I figured out who I was and why I had been trapped in that room. As I walked, fragments of memories started to surface again. As I continued through the forest, my mind seemed to flicker with brief flashes of images, pieces of a puzzle I couldn't yet see clearly. A street sign, the flash of a camera, a woman's face, blurred and indistinct. They came and went, like distant echoes of something I had once known, but now couldn't quite place. Each step through the woods was heavy, the wet ground squelching beneath my feet, but I pressed on. I had to. The fog grew thicker as I moved deeper into the trees, and soon I couldn't even see the house behind me. It felt like the world was shrinking, closing in, but I refused to let that panic creep back into my chest. I had to stay focused. I needed to find a way out of these woods, or at least figure out why they felt so familiar, so eerie. Every tree looked the same, tall and ancient, their bark dark and wet from the morning mist. The air was thick with moisture, almost suffocating, and the silence weighed on me. After what felt like hours of walking, the fog finally began to lift, revealing a clearing up ahead. I quickened my pace, hope flickering faintly in my chest. Maybe this was it. Maybe I'd find something, anything, that would help me make sense of this strange place. But as I stepped into the clearing, my heart sank. There was nothing here. Just more trees circling a patch of grass, and a few large rocks scattered haphazardly. For a moment I thought I saw movement, something shifting in the shadows between the trees, but when I blinked, it was gone. I shook my head, trying to clear the strange fog that seemed to be settling in my mind just as thickly as the one outside. I walked to one of the rocks and sat down, rubbing my temples. My thoughts were still fragmented, like pages torn from a book. Who am I? The question pulsed in my mind, relentless and unanswered. The brief glimpses of memory were too fragmented to piece together a full story. All I had were flashes, feelings, a sense that I had been here before, that I had seen these woods, maybe even this exact clearing. As I sat there, staring at the ground, something strange began to happen. A sound, faint at first, reached my ears. It was a low, rhythmic thudding like footsteps. My breath caught in my throat, and I turned sharply, scanning the perimeter of the clearing. The sound grew louder, closer, and then I saw him. A figure appeared from the mist, a man, tall and broad, wearing a black coat that billowed slightly as he walked. His face was hidden beneath a hood, but I could feel his eyes on me, watching, waiting. Panic surged through me. I didn't know who he was, but something about him filled me with dread. I stood up, ready to run, but before I could move, he raised a hand. "Stop," he said, his voice deep and commanding. I froze, unable to move. It wasn't just the force of his voice that held me in place. It was something else. Something invisible, yet powerful. It was like my body no longer obeyed my mind. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't answer. Instead, he took a few steps closer, his boots crunching softly on the damp grass. When he finally reached me, he stopped, towering over me. I could just make out the sharp lines of his jaw beneath the hood, the pale skin of his face, but his eyes were shadowed, hidden. "You don't remember, do you?" he said quietly, almost to himself. "I don't," I began, but he cut me off. "You were warned," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You were told to leave it alone, but you couldn't, could you?" My heart raced, confusion swirling in my mind. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said. "I don't even know who I am." For a long moment he said nothing. Then slowly he reached into his coat at something small, like a knife. My stomach dropped. I stumbled back, but again I couldn't move far. It was like some unseen force held me in place. "I tried to help you," he said, his voice softer now, almost regretful. "But you wouldn't listen. You got too close." "I don't understand," I pleaded, my voice rising in panic. "Please tell me what's happening." He stepped closer, lifting the knife slightly, and I flinched. But then, to my surprise, he didn't strike. Instead, he turned the knife in his hand and held it out to me, handle first. "Take it," he said. "You'll need it." I hesitated, staring at the blade. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion. but something in his voice, in the way he looked at me, told me I didn't have a choice. Slowly, I reached out and took the knife. It was cold and heavy in my hand. "What am I supposed to do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped back into the fog, his form dissolving into the mist until he was completely gone. I stood there, staring after him, my heart pounding in my chest. The knife felt strange in my hand, both a comfort and a threat. I didn't understand what had just happened, but one thing was clear. Whoever I was, whatever I had forgotten, I was in danger. This man, whoever he was, knew me. And now, with the knife in my hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just been given a choice. A path. Taking a deep breath, I turned and started walking again, deeper into the forest, gripping the knife tightly. Every shadow seemed alive, every rustle of leaves made my pulse quicken. But I couldn't stop now. Something was out there, waiting for me. Something that would unlock the truth. Hours passed, or maybe it was only minutes. It was hard to tell in the haze of the forest. But eventually I came across another clearing. This one different. There was a structure in the middle of it. A small cabin, old and decrepit, with the windows boarded up and vines creeping along the sides. I approached cautiously, the knife still clutched in my hand. The door was slightly ajar, creaking in the wind. I pushed it open, my breath catching as it revealed a dark, empty room. There was no furniture, no signs of life, just a dirt-covered floor and the faint smell of mildew. But as I stepped inside, a cold breeze brushed past me, and I heard it again. Footsteps. Not my own, but someone else's, coming from somewhere inside the cabin. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. No response. I took a few more steps, my eyes scanning the darkness. The cabin was small, just one room with no visible doors, but I could feel that there was more to it. There had to be. As I walked further in, my foot hit something hard, and I looked down to see a trapdoor hidden beneath a layer of dust. My heart skipped a beat. Without hesitation, I knelt down and pulled at the rusted handle. It took all my strength, but eventually, the door creaked open, revealing a set of stairs leading down into the earth. I hesitated for only a moment before descending, the knife still clutched tightly in my hand. The air grew colder as I went deeper, the walls closing in around me. It was dark, but there was a faint light at the bottom of the stairs, just enough to guide me. When I reached the bottom, I stepped into a narrow hallway, dimly lit by a single flickering bulb. The walls were lined with old wooden planks, and the floor beneath me creaked with every step. It felt like I had entered a different world, one that was hidden away from the forest above. And then I saw it. At the end of the hallway was a door, slightly ajar, just like the one upstairs. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. When I pushed the door open, what I saw made me stop in my tracks. It was a room filled with photographs. Photographs of me. Hundreds of them, scattered across the walls, the floor, the ceiling. They were old, some black and white, others faded with time, but they were all unmistakably of me. Some were recent, showing me in clothes I didn't recognize. Others were older, from a life I couldn't remember. My breath caught in my throat as I stepped further into the room. There was a table in the center, and on it lay a single, folded piece of paper. With trembling hands, I picked it up and unfolded it. Eddie Hampton. The thief who forgot. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Eddie Hampton. Was that my name? I stared at the paper, my mind reeling. Eddie Hampton. It didn't feel familiar, but there it was in black ink, written like some kind of strange revelation. Was that me? Was that who I was, a thief who had somehow forgotten his entire life? The photographs surrounding me seemed to confirm it. Each one was a snapshot of me in places I didn't remember being, doing things I couldn't recall. There were images of me in crowded streets, in dimly lit rooms, even sitting in front of a safe, cracking it open with steady hands. But I couldn't deny the truth any longer. The knife in my hand, the man in the black coat, the images covering these walls, they all pointed to something darker, something I hadn't wanted to confront. I was a thief, a criminal, and now for some reason I had been wiped clean. A blank slate, thrown into this nightmare of half-remembered fragments. I slumped down into a chair that stood in the corner of the room, dropping the knife on the table beside me. My head pounded as I tried to process it all. How had I ended up here, in this rundown cabin, with no memory of the crimes I'd committed? And more importantly, why couldn't I remember? The sound of footsteps echoed faintly from the hallway behind me, pulling me out of my spiraling thoughts. My pulse quickened. Someone was coming. I scrambled to my feet, glancing around the room for a place to hide. The photographs seemed to press in on me from every angle, a suffocating reminder of the man I used to be, or still was. I spotted a large cabinet in the corner and darted toward it, wrenching the door open just enough to squeeze inside. The space was cramped, the smell of old wood and dust overwhelming, but it was the only hiding place I could find. I held my breath as the footsteps drew closer, stopping just outside the door. I heard a soft creak, then the door opened slowly. Through the narrow crack in the cabinet door, I could see a figure stepping into the room. It was the man in the black coat, the same one who had given me the knife earlier. He stood there surveying the room with cold, calculating eyes. His gaze lingered on the photographs plastered across the walls, and for a moment, I thought he might leave. But then, he spoke. "Eddie," he said quietly, his voice low and almost mournful. "You've found the truth, haven't you?" I stiffened, clutching the sides of the cabinet to keep from making any noise. How did he know I was here? Could he somehow sense my presence? "You always had a knack for finding things," the man continued, walking slowly around the room. "That's what made you such a good thief, but you never knew when to stop. You got greedy, and now, look where that's gotten you." He stopped in front of the table, picking up the knife I had left behind. I watched as he twirled it in his hand, the blade catching the dim light. "You don't remember much, do you?" he asked, though I knew he didn't expect an answer. "That's by design. We couldn't let you remember everything, not after what you did. But the pieces always come back eventually." My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to make sense of his words. What had I done? What was so terrible that they had wiped my memory clean, leaving me to wander through this strange, fragmented nightmare? "I tried to help you," the man said, almost to himself. "But you wouldn't listen. You thought you could outsmart everyone, thought you could walk away from this life, just like that. But that's not how it works, Eddie. You don't get to just forget." He turned toward the cabinet now, his eyes scanning the room as if he could feel my presence. I pressed myself further back into the cramped space, trying to make myself invisible. But I knew it wouldn't matter. He knew I was here. He had known from the moment he entered the cabin. "Come out, Eddie," he said softly, his voice no longer menacing, but resigned. "You can't hide from this. You can't hide from who you are." My body tensed, but I didn't move. I didn't know what would happen if I came out, whether he would try to kill me, or help me, or something else entirely. But staying hidden felt like a delaying tactic, an act of cowardice. I had come this far, uncovered this much of the truth. Now it was time to face it. With a deep breath, I pushed the cabinet door open and stepped out. The man in the black coat didn't seem surprised to see me. He simply watched as I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest. "I don't understand," I said, my voice hoarse. "Why did you wipe my memory? What did I do?" The man studied me for a long moment before answering. You crossed a line, Eddie. You betrayed people who trusted you. People who don't take betrayal lightly. I shook my head, trying to piece it together. But why can't I remember any of it? What's the point of wiping my memory if... Because you were a liability, the man interrupted, his voice cold. You knew too much, and when you started to ask questions, to poke around where you didn't belong, well, let's just say it was safer for everyone if you forgot. A chill ran down my spine. What kind of people had I been involved with? And what had I stumbled onto that had made them decide to erase my memory? But now the memories are coming back, the man said, his eyes narrowing. And that's dangerous for both of us. I swallowed hard. So what happens now? The man stepped closer, his gaze intense. Now you have a choice. You can try to run, to escape this life and everything you've done, but you'll never be free. They'll find you, eventually. Or what? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Or you can remember, he said. Remember everything and deal with the consequences. I felt like the ground was shifting beneath me, like the walls of the cabin were closing in. My whole body trembled with the weight of the decision before me. Did I want to remember? Did I want to know the full truth about who I was, even if it meant facing the darkness I had apparently tried so hard to forget? The man watched me carefully, as if he could see the war raging inside me. Then, slowly, he extended the knife toward me once again. Take it, he said. It's your decision. But once you remember, there's no going back. I stared at the blade, my mind spinning with the possibilities. If I took it, if I chose to remember, there was no telling what kind of horrors I might uncover. But if I didn't, if I chose to run, to stay in the dark, I would never truly know who I was. For a long moment, I stood frozen, torn between fear and curiosity, between the safety of ignorance and the danger of the truth. You don't remember, do you? He said quietly, almost to himself. I don't, I began, but he cut me off out and took the knife. The moment my fingers closed around the handle, something shifted inside me. The memories that had been locked away for so long began to flood back, rushing through my mind in a dizzying blur. Faces, places, moments I had forgotten, no, had been forced to forget, came crashing back with terrifying clarity. I saw myself standing in front of a vault, cracking the code with ease. I saw the faces of the men I had betrayed, their eyes full of anger and betrayal. I saw myself running, hiding, trying to escape the consequences of my actions. And then I saw the moment when it all went wrong, the moment when they caught up with me and decided that I would never remember who I was. I stumbled back, clutching my head as the memories surged through me, overwhelming my senses. The man in the black coat watched silently as I collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. When the flood of memories finally slowed, I looked up at him, my heart pounding in my chest. I remembered now. I remembered everything. And I knew that there was no escaping what I had done. The man nodded as if he could see the change in my eyes. Now you understand, he said quietly. I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. I do. So what will you do? He asked. I stared down at the knife in my hand, feeling the weight of my past pressing down on me. I didn't know the answer yet. But one thing was certain. I couldn't run anymore. I'll face it, I said, my voice steady. The man gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Good, he said. Then it's time to finish what you started. And with that, he turned and walked out of the cabin, leaving me alone with the weight of my memories and the knife in my hand. I didn't follow him. Not yet. First, I needed to breathe. To process. Because now that I remembered, the hardest part was still to come. The part where I would have to face the consequences of the life I had once tried so desperately to leave behind. Conclusion. In the end, Eddie Hampton faced the harsh reality of his past. Once a man trapped in a web of deceit and danger, he now knew the full weight of his actions. The memories that had been buried deep within him flooded back, revealing the life of a small-time thief, caught up in a world much darker than he ever anticipated. With no place to run and no way to escape his past, Eddie chose to confront his sins head-on. It was a decision that would change the course of his life forever, because sometimes facing the truth is the only way to find redemption.